The winter of 1944 was brutal. Snow covered the muddy European plains, and the sound of tank engines echoed through the fog like thunder rolling across a dead sky. The German war machine, though battered and bleeding, was far from finished. On the Eastern Front and in scattered pockets across Western Europe, panzer divisions still rolled with terrifying precision, cutting through Allied lines wherever they found weakness. In one forgotten sector of the front, a young Allied commander named Captain Richard Haley faced a choice that would define not only his career but the fate of hundreds of men under his command. He had been tasked with holding a narrow valley against an approaching German panzer formation. His orders were clear: hold the line at all costs. But Haley was no ordinary officer. Before the war, he'd studied terrain warfare and trap tactics at Sandhurst, fascinated by how ancient generals like Hannibal and Scipio used deception instead of brute strength. He understood something that many didn't. A battle isn't always won by standing still, it's won by shaping your enemy's expectations. That morning, his scouts reported what he had feared. Not one, but 3 panzer units were advancing through the valley. Their formation was tight, their artillery already testing the Allied positions with probing shells. If Haley held the line as ordered, his small force, barely 2 under-strength battalions, would be annihilated within hours. Around him, his officers shouted for action. "Sir, we can't retreat." One lieutenant barked. High command said this valley must be held. Haley looked at the map, then out at the white horizon. He could already hear the growl of engines getting closer. He knew staying meant death. But he also knew retreating could mean disgrace, or worse, a court-martial for disobeying orders. And yet, deep inside, a plan began to form. He remembered the narrow ridges behind the valley, places where the terrain narrowed to a funnel, perfect for channeling tanks into confined killing zones. If he could lure the Germans in far enough, he could trap them between hidden artillery positions and destroy them in one crushing counterattack. But for that to work, he'd need to look like he was running. So, Haley made the most controversial order of his life. "Pull back," he said quietly. "All units, full withdrawal to secondary positions." The radio crackled with disbelief. Some officers refused to move until he repeated the order. To them, this wasn't strategy, it was cowardice. But Haley didn't waver. He ordered engineers to leave behind dummy guns, abandoned jeeps, and even fake casualty stations to sell the illusion of chaos. His men withdrew under cover of dusk, slipping into the treeline while artillery units repositioned to hidden ridges 2 miles back. By dawn, when the German advance reached the valley, they found what looked like total retreat. The panzer commanders, confident they had crushed the Allied defense, pressed forward with reckless speed. They didn't realize that every move they made was being tracked. Allied spotters in the hills sent coded signals to Haley's command post. The Germans believed they were chasing a beaten enemy, but in truth, they were being led by the nose into a deadly snare. Haley's men waited in silence. Snow muffled every sound except for the distant rumble of treads. He had placed his anti-tank guns behind fallen trees, camouflaged so well they looked like part of the landscape. Mortar teams hid in dugouts, and the artillery, his final weapon, was zeroed in on the valley's exit. By mid-morning, the 1st Panzer column entered the bottleneck. Haley watched through his binoculars as they advanced. 30 tanks, then 50, their armor gleaming under the pale sun. The German infantry followed close behind, shouting triumphantly, unaware that the hills around them were alive with waiting guns. Then came the moment Haley had been waiting for. He let the 1st column pass halfway through the valley before giving the signal. One red flare shot into the sky. Instantly, the mountains roared. Artillery shells rained down from both sides, tearing through the snow and mud. The first few shells struck the lead tanks, flipping them like tin toys. Anti-tank guns opened fire from hidden trenches, their shells piercing armor with pinpoint accuracy. Machine gun nests came alive, cutting down exposed infantry. The valley, which had looked so peaceful minutes earlier, exploded into chaos. The Germans tried to turn around, but it was too late. The narrow terrain that had allowed them to advance so easily now trapped them in a steel graveyard. Tanks collided, blocking their own retreat. Smoke filled the air, and communication between units broke down completely. From his command post, Haley calmly directed the bombardment. His men, once demoralized and fearful, now fought with renewed fury. They realized that their cowardly commander had not abandoned them, he had saved them. For 6 hours, the ambush continued. Every attempt by the Germans to break through met with brutal resistance. When night finally fell, the valley was silent again, except for the crackle of burning wrecks. 3 panzer units, over 90 tanks and hundreds of men, were wiped out or captured. The next morning, Allied reinforcements arrived and found Haley's troops still holding the ridge, exhausted but victorious. Reports of the battle spread quickly. At first, higher command demanded to know why he had disobeyed orders. But when reconnaissance confirmed the destruction of the panzer divisions, the tone changed. Haley, the coward, was suddenly a hero. Historians would later call it one of the most effective small-unit tactical victories of the late war. But for Haley, it wasn't about glory, it was about survival through intelligence. He had understood what too many officers forgot: a retreat is not always defeat. Sometimes it's a weapon, one sharper than any sword or shell. In the years that followed, Haley would often reflect on that snowy day. The soldiers who had doubted him never forgot either. To them, the word coward took on a new meaning, not as an insult, but as a reminder that true courage often hides behind humility, patience, and the willingness to be misunderstood. In the end, Captain Haley's retreat wasn't a surrender. It was a masterpiece of misdirection, a move that destroyed 3 panzer units, saved his men, and proved that in war, the bravest act can sometimes be walking away from the fight, just long enough to win it. By the time the first German tank entered the valley, Captain Haley's plan was already set in motion. Every squad, every gunner, every forward observer knew their position and timing to the second. What the Germans believed was a broken, retreating Allied line was in fact a carefully laid web of steel and silence. The snow-covered landscape looked deserted. Abandoned rifles, overturned trucks, and scattered ammunition crates painted the illusion of panic. Smoke from smoldering wrecks drifted lazily through the cold air, adding to the scene of chaos. But beneath that surface, underneath the trees, behind the rocks, inside shallow dugouts, Haley's men waited. They were invisible, their nerves stretched tight as piano wires. As the sun began to rise, the low rumble of tank engines grew louder. Then, through the haze, the first formation appeared, sleek Panzer IVs leading the way, followed by heavier Panthers and supporting infantry. Their tracks crunched over the snow and frozen mud. The German commander, Colonel Weiss, believed the Allies had broken and fled. His scouts had reported minimal resistance, and his confidence grew with every mile. "Forward," Weiss shouted, waving his men ahead. "Crush them before they can regroup." But what he couldn't see was that the valley he was charging into was a perfect natural funnel, a killing ground surrounded by forested slopes and concealed ridgelines. It was exactly where Haley wanted him. Hidden spotters on the hills watched the columns move into position. One by one, the German tanks rolled deeper into the valley until nearly the entire force was inside. At Haley's command post, 2 miles back, a radio operator turned to him. "Sir, the last panzer just entered the pass." Haley nodded slowly. "Good. Close the gates." A single red flare hissed into the sky. The response was instantaneous. From the western ridge, Allied artillery unleashed its fury. The first shells struck the lead tanks, turning the front of the column into a blazing inferno. The sound was deafening, a thunderous echo rolling off the valley walls. Seconds later, anti-tank guns hidden along the eastern slope opened fire, targeting the rear vehicles and cutting off any chance of retreat. The Germans were trapped. Colonel Weiss's voice crackled over his radio, demanding an explanation. "What's happening? Why have we stopped? Push forward." But there was no way forward. The lead tanks were burning wrecks, their crews scrambling for cover amid the flames. The narrow valley that had looked like an easy route now became a death trap. Then the second wave of the ambush began. Haley's infantry opened fire from the tree line, raking German troops with machine gun bursts. Mortar shells exploded among the clustered panzergrenadiers, scattering them in all directions. From the hilltops, spotters adjusted the artillery fire, zeroing in on the densest parts of the enemy formation. The precision was devastating, each volley hitting tighter and tighter, crushing tanks like tin cans. Weiss tried to reorganize. He ordered his flanking units to scale the slopes and silence the guns, but the terrain betrayed him. The snow was deep, the rocks treacherous, and every approach path was covered by Allied sharpshooters. Those who tried to climb were picked off one by one. From his observation point, Haley watched through binoculars as the chaos unfolded exactly as planned. His retreat had worked perfectly. The Germans were fighting blind, surrounded, and without room to maneuver. He gave a new order: bring the artillery 200 yards forward. Target the center mass, break their cohesion. Within minutes, another round of shells slammed into the trapped panzer column. A direct hit tore the turret off a Panther, sending it spinning into the snow. Ammunition trucks caught fire, turning the valley into an inferno of orange flame and black smoke. German radio transmissions filled with panic. Command: we are surrounded. Air support: we need Luftwaffe cover immediately. Too many guns. Our tanks are pinned. But there was no help coming. The Luftwaffe had been grounded by bad weather, and nearby German divisions were too far to respond in time. The trap had closed, and Weiss was on his own. Meanwhile, Haley's men moved with practiced efficiency. Teams of engineers rolled anti-tank mines down the slopes to block escape routes. Riflemen advanced in short bursts, using the smoke and confusion to get closer. Despite the freezing cold and exhaustion, the men fought like demons. They knew this was their moment, to turn humiliation into triumph. By mid-afternoon, the battle reached its climax. The Germans made one last desperate attempt to break out. Weiss gathered the remaining tanks, maybe a dozen still functional, and ordered a charge toward the northern pass. The ground shook as they roared forward, firing wildly at anything that moved. Haley anticipated it. He had held his reserve artillery precisely for this moment. When the tanks reached the halfway point, he gave the command: fire everything we have. The hillside erupted. A wall of explosions tore across the snow, engulfing the German charge in fire and shrapnel. When the smoke cleared, nothing moved. The charge had been annihilated. Silence followed. Then, one by one, white flags began to appear among the smoke. The surviving German infantry dropped their weapons and surrendered, dazed and disbelieving. For them, the cowardly retreat they had mocked just hours ago had turned into their destruction. When Haley finally walked into the valley, he saw the scale of his victory. Dozens of burnt-out tanks lay scattered across the snow. The once proud panzer formation was reduced to wreckage. The smell of smoke and fuel hung in the air. His men, though exhausted, cheered quietly as he passed. They understood now. The retreat hadn't been fear, it had been foresight. Haley knelt beside one destroyed Panther tank and brushed snow off the black cross painted on its hull. He knew what this meant. 3 entire panzer units, nearly 100 tanks, neutralized in a single day. It was one of the most devastating ambushes of the war. Later, as reports were sent to Allied headquarters, disbelief turned to astonishment. Intelligence officers demanded confirmation. How could a retreating force destroy such a massive enemy formation? But when reconnaissance photos arrived showing the valley filled with wrecks, there was no denying it. Haley's cowardice had been a tactical masterpiece. He never bragged about it. When journalists later asked how he pulled it off, he simply said, "They came looking for fear. I gave them confidence instead, and it killed them." The trap that day became a legend among his men. It taught them something that no military manual could: that sometimes the boldest act of war is not to charge forward, but to make the enemy believe you've already lost, then destroy them when they least expect it. The valley where it happened would later be marked on Allied maps with a single phrase: the coward's trap. And to every soldier who fought there, it was proof that courage takes many forms, and that even a retreat, in the hands of a strategist, can be the deadliest attack of all.